Well, good day, everyone. My name's Philip Konopka. I'm the County Ag Agent over in Lewis County. And with me today is Tad Campbell, the Mason County Ag Agent. We're going to have a deep discussion on pesticide update and safety. But before we get started, I got to give credit to Dr. Rick Besson with the University of Kentucky with the help of this presentation. So, as we start talking about what's in the news of pesticide, Tad, safety always comes up. And then we get the question, well, how dangerous is it? Well, over in Hawaii, they took 8,000 pesticide users. So stop and think about that. 8,000 pesticide users. That's a pretty big number. Over 34 years, not just 1 or 2 years, but 34 years of data, and conducted a study with Japanese men. And out of that 8,000, 45% of those had a higher risk for heart attacks. It's alarming, isn't it? It is. Stop and think about those numbers. The odds are pretty good that if you're using pesticides in that study, that you're going to have some sort of health repercussions a little bit later on in life.
As it goes with your heart. I mean, a really important organ that we need, we want to maintain and all that good stuff. And, throughout this entire presentation with our pesticide certification, we've tried to continue to emphasize personal protective equipment. I'll get it out there in a second, but personal protective equipment is really important as us as applicators to maintain our health and safety. And we have gone over and over and over the importance of those particular things, where they're going to be found on the label, the importance of knowing what each one of those are, just a multitude of different things. But if this doesn't kind of open your eye to why we want to protect ourselves as applicators, I don't really know what would.
No, and everybody likes shortcuts. Everybody takes shortcuts, but personal protective equipment is not one shortcut we need to take. It's on there for a very specific reason.
I agree. And those are minimums that they put on there.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you don't have to be fully suited on certain chemicals and things like that. But when it requires it, we really don't want to worry about what the weather is outside. We want to get suited to be able to mix and apply those particular chemicals. So definitely this is an eye-opener. Hopefully it is for those of you that are listening to this presentation. But yes, your safety is our concern as well as it should be your concern, and following that PPE will help mitigate some of those risks involved with mixing, loading, unloading, applying all the processes that we have to undergo when we're applying these chemicals to our farm.
Most of our pesticide applicators are farmers that we work with on a daily basis. And speaking for both of us, we want to work with you for several years to come. So please take care of yourself and make sure you use that equipment.
Definitely.
So let's get into toxicity. Are some of the chemicals we use around the house, are they just as dangerous, or are they safer, or what we got going on, Dad?
Well, I think if you kind of look at the LDs on a lot of the oral toxicities on these particular groups of offerings here, some of the chemicals that are listed at the top have, I guess, a less toxicity than the ones that are located at the bottom.
The longer the bar is, the safer it is. So let's look at Bravo. Bravo's an insecticide that we use a lot. Roundup is up there. Everybody knows Roundup. Everybody uses Roundup at one point in time. But Roundup is a whole lot safer than white vinegar. That's a common chemical that we have around in the house.
Correct. And then you start looking, at some everyday things that we treat aches and pains and stuff with. Look at our Tylenol and our aspirin or Motrin, where they're listed on this particular offering. I mean, so toxicity is a hard thing to understand and grasp. Everything on here has toxicity. It can be a major problem.
The old adage
look at it.
rings true. The dose makes the poison.
Correct. to say that Bravo is not toxic.
No, not by
in
any means.
any sense of the word. We're just trying to show that there are a lot of things that we come in contact every day, being agriculture chemicals or just household items that we have around the house that have the toxic potential, and the half-lives are on some normal stuff that we're used to,
We wouldn't think twice about having around.
Yeah, I mean, how many people will pour vinegar on their hands to get some type of odor off or something like that, or use it as a window cleaner to get bugs and things like that off the window, and look at where it falls into this toxicity chart that we see here. So, yes, a lot of things out there are toxic, and we just need to make sure that in the right volume and consistency, the toxicity could be pretty potent to anyone or all of us.
I want to point out paraquat right there. Paraquat is extremely toxic, and you actually have to have a special certification to apply paraquat now, due to the toxicity potential and a lot of people dying from unintended exposures to that product.
So they basically are requiring applicators to have
an additional certification,
to be able to handle that, just as they are with like the dicamba chemistry for soybeans and things like that.
Right, and the private applicator test that you're taking now or getting the license for doesn't meet those requirements. You have to have that as a forerunner, but you have to take a couple extra certification classes to get those.
And that's good information for some of the folks that may be listening to the presentation. Again, not saying that that there's, Bravo is not, doesn't provide a safe environment. I mean, it's still toxic within itself, but when you compare it to the other things on this list, its toxicity is less than all the things below it.
Yes, it's a safer, so to speak, chemical than some of the other ones.
Correct. But again, it still has its own toxicity problems.
Yes.
Within itself as well too. So just wanted to make sure that we got that out. That this is not to say that the thing on the top of the list is going to be safe or is safe to handle without PPE or anything like that.
No,
all these things have their own toxicities, and it's based on the LDs or the half-lives of these products. For them to break down and how much toxicity they have until they break down in their half-lives and things like that. So again, it's kind of an eye-opening chart, but at the same time, it's not to take away the toxicity from the ones on the top compared to the ones on the bottom.
No, nothing like that. It's just to get you to pay attention.
Moving on, we're gonna. So right now, we're gonna look at some symptoms that might be a little variable compared to what we typically are, feel and go through and things like that. But a lot of the exposure that we have to these chemicals are going to be around, our head area, because during the mixing and the unloading and those kind of things. So time of exposure, closeness of exposure, there's a lot of different things that can kind of fall into this. But let's talk about some of the types of exposures that we may be concerned about.
Sure. Eyes are a good way that a chemical can enter our body. In order to for the pesticide to affect us, it has to get into our system somehow.
Correct.
So the eyes are a good way they can come in, and kind of a scary way. If we lose our eyesight, we've really lost a lot.
Correct. Another way is by breathing in through our nose. Inhalation to some of the powder chemicals that we're using, some of the highly odorous type chemicals that we have. Even those odors are carrying some of the molecules of the chemicals at times, and we could run into some overexposures just through breathing those in, being too close to the tank when we're adding chemical or whatnot.
you may accidentally ingest it. Sometimes chemicals get stored into non-chemical jugs, and somebody might think that it's a drink or something like that and accidentally ingest it and cause some issues that way.
Let's hope that the chemicals aren't being transferred to non-chemical jugs, but everybody's kind of been through the game long enough to know that it has happened, and there's stories out there about situations like that. The other area that is the biggest area of concern is your skin, because there's so much surface area for you to actually expose to chemicals with your skin. All over your entire body, your skin's going to be a source or a pathway for that chemical to come into your system. There's places in your skin that are more susceptible for exposures and absorptions, but the skin in general is an area that we are aware of that is an absorption area for some of these chemicals. And I always like to talk about the story when I'm doing a face-to-face situation with pesticide trainings is that as farmers we wear leather boots, usually hard, steel-toed leather work shoes, and we wear them from the time we get up until we go back to home to call it a day. And if Monday we accidentally spill chemical on our leather shoes, we may not realize that we're being exposed until Thursday or Friday, because on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we go check cows in the dew because we can't do anything else. So we're adding moisture to that concentrated chemical that's in that leather, and it finally gets to our feet. And between our toes is a highly absorbent area on our skin, and we can start taking that chemical in from that. So we need to make sure that we're, first off, wearing the proper PPE. We want to make sure that we're covering our leather shoes or our leather work boots with those disposable rubber outlets, the little skins that go on there, or make sure that we're wearing chemical-resistant rubber boots when we're dealing with chemicals, and then take the time to put our everyday work shoes back on after we're doing that. Another thing is that we do everything right. We've got our rubber gloves on, we've got our rubber boots on, we've got our glasses, our face mask, and everything on to be able to handle these chemicals. And anyone that's mixed chemicals knows that the rubber gloves that we use are very cumbersome and not very dexterous when we start to do things. So we try to put a lid back on, and it's a small lid. You're trying to thread it. It's just not working right. The next thing you know, you lift your arm, and underneath your arm, you pull that leather glove off to put that chemical on, or that chemical lid on, the jug lid on, and you may not get exposure on that exposed hand from that lid at that point in time, but if you had any chemical on that glove that you just put under your arm to pull off of your hand, another highly absorbent area is our underarms or our armpits.
I was going to say, just like the toes, our underarms are a big place of absorption.
We could be following everything right, and then something kind of make us get kind of flustered or frustrated, and it just goes to one little thing like that where we can actually see some absorption into our body, and even though we were trying to do everything the right way. So we all just constantly need to be aware and conscious of how we could expose ourselves through our skin, our eyes, our nose, our mouth, so that we limit that potential exposure.
If it doesn't get in our body, it's never going to be a problem for us.
Correct.
So take this gentleman right here. He may be having the correct PPE on. I can't say for sure. However, I don't like the fact that he's not wearing any face shield, or has any gloves on.
And if you look at his wand and the growth of the tomato plants, I'm assuming that it appears to be that he's spraying. If he's spraying a chemical, he's going to be reaching above his head as well. So, there's a lot of questions in this particular situation. And granted, he just may have water in his pack. We don't know.
No, we don't know.
Just pulling this random picture out, we can kind of point out that there's some exposure points that he's going to have if that's not just regular water in that container.
Sure. And especially on something like that where he's spraying at his level, the wind may shift. and cause him all kinds of problems as well. So, pesticide poisoning symptoms. We live in the age right now where there's a certain disease that we know a lot of symptoms about. But when we get to pesticide, sweating and fever, nausea, vomiting, skin irritation can be a result of exposure to pesticides.
Right. And granted, you mentioned we're in an age right now where, a lot of the symptoms that are out there for the virus that's caused the pandemic coincide with a lot of normal day-to-day things that we have, sinus problems, flu, just a common flu, a common cold. So there's a lot of things that overlap. And that's why I was kind of talking about the leather shoes.
Mm-hmm.
3 or 4 days down the road, you're not going to be thinking about, if you're showing some of these symptoms, that it's pesticide exposure. However, that's what it could be, and not realize it, because you've already done that. You've checked the box off on Monday for that. Now it's Thursday, and you're not thinking about that anymore. You've already done everything you thought was right on Monday, and now you're experiencing some of these things. And it could be as a result of just exposure to that, because you spilt a little bit on your shoes and didn't realize it.
Mm-hmm.
So this list really basically coincides with a lot of different things out there.
It does, and especially now, if you've experienced any of these symptoms after using a pesticide, seek medical attention right away.
Rule of thumb is to assume that it's pesticide exposure, so that you can rule it out rather than not, and then it become a more of a problem than it would be if you would have tried that in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the best way of kind of handling that is start with it being, yes, I've been exposed, and then rule that out before you move on to something else as far as the cause of some of these symptoms that you would be having.
Oh, I agree wholeheartedly with you on that one. So first aid. Let's talk a little bit about first aid. And there will be a section on that label that deals specifically with first aid. Something like skin exposure. Recognize the signs of pesticide poisoning. The sooner you realize that you've been exposed to the pesticide on the skin, wash it off just as quick as you can with soap and water.
Right. And have some of these things there just in case.
Mm-hmm.
Have some eye rinse. Have a gallon of just regular distilled or drinking water there, so that you can dilute anything that may get on your skin or something like that. It's much better to have it there and not need it than not have it there and need it. So just have it there just in case, because the quicker you can get that diluted and rinsed off of your body, the less likely you are to have higher risk associated with exposure from that particular product. So kind of keep that in mind as you're preparing to do your spraying all season long.
Sure, and it's not a bad idea to keep a change of clothes in the truck either. Sometimes if you get contaminated enough, the best option is just dispose of what you've spilled everything on.
I agree. And, a lot of people may be a little modest about trying to change clothes, out in the field or something like that, but it's a whole lot better getting that chemical soaked clothing off of you and changing clothes than it is to worry about, what somebody's thinking that you're doing out there in the field, changing those clothes and things like that. Because it definitely could be the difference between how severe your symptoms get, if you can get as much of that away from your body as possible moving forward.
If you inhale pesticides, or if you're with somebody that inhaled a pesticide, make sure that you're under protection before you go in and save them. Our first instinct is, I've got to save my brother, my dad, my friend, whoever it is. But don't you become a victim in the process. Make sure that you've got a respirator on or something like that to protect you, so that you can help them.
Very true. Very true. Your first thought is to provide help that's needed and things like that. But if you put yourself in jeopardy as well, then there could be multiple victims rather than just dealing with the one that is at hand at that particular point in time. Another thing to maybe mention too is that as applicators, as farmers, we're pretty independent. Usually, we're a one-person show when it comes to doing these type of things. Anytime that you are going to be handling, mixing, spraying pesticides, I highly, highly recommend that you make someone else aware of it. Let someone else know that you're going to such and such area or such and such farm to be able to apply these products, and let them know where that label is so that they can find out what that first aid or the first part of that first aid response would be if you did get exposure. Because sometimes with these chemicals, if we get exposed, we're incapacitated and can't physically do anything for ourselves. So we're relying upon someone else. And the more people that know what you're using and where you're at and things like that, the better off you would be if you did become exposed to some of these products.
Sure, and if you come up with somebody that is exposed, that's having problems, after you make sure that you're safe to enter, get that victim to fresh air just as quick as possible, immediately. If they've got some tight-fitting clothing on, you need to loosen that up. If breathing stops, you may have to induce CPR. If a lot of these sprayers are tall and in high places, so if the chemical doesn't take you out, the fall may hurt you pretty bad too. So we want to try to protect them from falling if possible.
Correct.
And then keep them. This part can be very tricky. Keep them calm and keep them quiet while you seek medical attention. Some people like to panic, and it's hard to get them back under control.
And if you think about it, if you are in a panic state, your adrenaline and your blood's pumping a lot faster, so you're actually adding more of that exposure throughout your body through just a normal response to a situation at hand. So definitely some good tips there from a first aid situation from inhaled pesticides. When we deal with swallowed pesticides, first off, I don't think there's a pesticide out there that's not harmful if swallowed.
Yeah, I agree with you on that.
I will say that. But as far as how we deal with a swallowed pesticide is definitely something we have to refer to the label, because there's probably as many labels that say don't induce vomiting as there are that do say induce vomiting. So never induce vomiting if the victim is unconscious or convulsing.
True. Never do
that.
that.
Just makes another situation out of the situation currently in hand. And you never induce vomiting of a corrosive insecticide.
Sure. I mean, that can cause more damage coming back up
yes,
than it would if it was just in your stomach. A good way to do that is to dilute these with either milk or water. I was listening to Dr. Besson, and he said always have a can of condensed milk in your toolbox. And I didn't understand why. But if the case were it was ingested, we can use the milk to dilute it.
Or if we've got that gallon of drinking water that we are going to use to wash it off our skin, we may need to be drinking that gallon to help reduce the amount of concentration in that ingested insecticide at that point in time or pesticide.
As a rule of thumb, any pesticide that's an EC or in a solution formulation, don't induce the vomiting. I mean, that's just a rule of thumb to always check the SDS label in the first aid. But
yes,
that's a good rule of thumb to have in the back of your mind.
And that's another reason why it's good to have multiple people know what you're doing and where you're at, so that they can read the label and know what you need to do if you're not able to do so yourself too. So definitely some good things to know when we're dealing with applications from a first aid situation.
So now we've talked about some of the potential things. First aid kits. Those are always nice to have. It's kind of like life insurance. It's nice to have, but I'm not really anxious to use it.
Right. And I think a lot of things that we are talking about in this presentation are things that we hope we never have to use.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's one of those situations where you plan for the grim or the dark of the situation and hope for the best.
Sure.
Right? But when you start looking at a first aid kit, here's some pretty important items to have along in that first aid kit. Gloves, chemical type gloves.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Not just gloves, but we want chemical resistant gloves in our first aid kit.
Change of clothes. If we dump a bunch of chemicals on us, we want to make sure we can get that off of us very quickly and have a clean change of clothes to get into.
And if we can't, if we don't have that change of clothes, if we've got some of those disposable Tyvek coveralls, that's our change of clothes at that point.
Sure.
We don't have to have street clothes on. We can get in that Tyvek suit until we get back to where we can change clothes again. Emergency blanket. Sometimes if you're incapacitated with these products, your body's going to shiver and things like that. So having a blanket on hand. Several bottles of clean water.
Yeah, we may be at a farm or something like that doesn't have a clean water available,
or any access to clean water. So we need to make sure that we're providing that on site or on person at all times. Activated charcoal.
Always good to have around.
It can help dilute or change the reaction to some of these chemicals. You mentioned the can of evaporated milk. Not many people would have thought about that, but that's a small package that's easily packed, and we can have it at our side if needed.
And it has a very long shelf life.
Right. So you could buy one for a year or two, and it would be good. I mean, several bottles of eye wash. Our eyes are really important to us, and the sooner we can get that chemical that may get in contact or exposure with our eyes, we need to make sure that we get that diluted and out as soon as possible.
Sealable bags may become important that we have to put some stuff in, especially if we're keeping some of our first aid kit clean and safe. We can put them in those sealable bags, and they're not accidentally exposed to anything.
Sure.
Single-use paper towels. Always keep a roll in the truck myself, but it's nice to have those to help contain the spill. Don't want anything reusable. I want something I can use once and throw away.
And they help wipe it off your skin after you've used your gallon of water to dry your skin off in case the air temperature's a little cool or something like that. So a lot of uses for our paper towels. Simple bandages,
scrapes, cuts, they all happen.
We do that all the time. I mean, a lot of times when we're trying to fix a particular part of a piece of equipment or something like that, we'll scratch a finger or something.
Sure, that wrench slips every now and then.
But if you have that exposure on those open sores, it's quickly taken into your body. So definitely we want to cut down the quickness of the absorption if we possibly can.
And in dish soap, always have a good bottle of dish soap running around. And you want to make sure that you're washing underneath free-flowing water. You don't want to rinse your hands in a bucket or anything like that, because you just made your bucket contaminated, and you just reinfecting yourself. So you always want to make sure it's underneath free-flowing water.
And again, a lot of us would look at this list and say, that's overkill or something like that. But it's kind of like having four-wheel drive when you're out on the back 40 of the farm checking cows. If you're in a two-wheel drive truck and you hit a wet spot and you get hung up and it's a mile and a half back to the tractor, but if you have a button and you push four-wheel drive and you just pull right on out of it, I kind of look at this kit kind of being the same thing.
Sure.
You don't use four-wheel drive unless you need it, but it's nice to have if you need it. Same thing with these first aid kits.
If you don't have everything together and an emergency happens, you won't know where to look. You're going to hit panic mode, and you will not know where to go in the house and find everything. So you need to have everything in a central location, easy access, ready to go at an instant.
I agree. Because the last thing on our mind is, where's this stuff at? If it's right there and we can open a box and it's all right there, we'll probably use a lot of it. But if we're trying to find it, we may become too exposed to be able to continue to look for certain things too. So having it all there is really, really important.
So pesticide hazard. The risk equals exposure plus toxicity. And basically that means the more exposure or the more toxic it is, the higher the risk. Applicators working with concentrates, when they're mixing it, that's going to be our highest chance of getting exposed to a high dose of pesticide.
Let's take a look at the pictures here. You got the mixers, the containers, everything's touching
Mm-hmm.
or it's inside. We really want to have a space when we're mixing our chemicals so that we don't have a chance for backwash. We want to have that air pocket space so that we cut down on the potential splash or concentration of spills and things like that.
The air gap is a backflow preventer.
Right.
If you purchase a backflow preventer on the farm, that's going to be an expensive venture to get into.
Correct.
This is cheap. I like cheap that works.
Yes. So make sure that you are when you're mixing that you do provide that air gap so that you cut down on the chances of backsplash and different things like that. If we look at the system to the right there, where they're spraying the trees, those sprayers are very convenient and do a good job for what you're doing. Now, if you take a gander at the applicator on the tractor,
he's not wearing a mask.
He's not wearing a whole lot of protective gear to try to cover his skin or his face or many things at all. I believe he's got short sleeves on. It's hard to tell from that particular picture. But if you look at the droplets that are coming out of that particular unit, they're going to be fairly fine. It's almost like a fogging or a mist type situation. And a change of wind direction is going to cover that applicator in a matter of seconds.
Mm-hmm.
And is that going to be enough to cause a problem? We don't know the product that they're spraying. We don't, it could be water for all all we know at this point in time. But this particular setup is similar to some of the pull behind fan sprayers that we use for our pastures in this area.
Yeah, this particular one's an air blast sprayer used in an orchard, and it's very good at covering trees. That's what we need it for in an orchard. But like you said, Tad, it's a fine mist that's going to travel in the air, and if the wind shifts,
correct,
who knows where it's going?
Right. And the similar type sprayers that we use for our pastures, the fan sprayers that throw the 30-foot spread fan, outside the tug along behind piece of equipment, your wind current's usually one direction, so you're good going one way, but when you turn around and come back the other way, then you probably have the wind at a disfavorable position, either to your back or crossing you or something like that. So it's really important when we're using any kind of spray system to be fully clothed in the correct PPE.
Sure.
And again, we're not saying he's not. We're just saying that most PPE require some type of face protection, eye protection, and long sleeves at the least.
Sure.
And gloves.
And take the gentleman on the left. At first glance, he looks pretty good, but if you start to look in detail, he's not so good. Look at his gloves. At first, you think he's got protective hand wear on, but the fingers are exposed. So odds are that that's not going to repel any pesticide that he might accidentally splash on him. There is no air gap in the back tank there. So if a flow would stop, we could actually potentially siphon it back into our water source,
Correct.
which can cause a big problem down the road.
Correct. So these are just some things that we'd like to point out, with some visual pictures. Again, these were just random pictures through a presentation that we don't have any background information on. So, we don't know for sure what they're using or anything like that. But if we are using products that we typically use in our area, there would be more required PPE than what we're seeing in these situations.
Yes. So, if for some reason it doesn't have personal protective equipment on it, here's the minimum. Here is the bare minimum that you need, and if nothing else, it makes you look like a professional. And everybody wants to be a professional in their field. We need shoes and socks, long pants, long sleeve shirt, and gloves. But always double check that label, because there's most of the time will be more specific information on the pesticide PPE equipment that is needed.
Agreed totally.
All gloves are not created the same. We can get gloves anywhere, can't we, Ted?
We can. And when we are looking for specific gloves for chemical handling, we want to make sure that we are utilizing the proper specifications to be able to use them in a chemical situation.
If we use a glove that is not chemical resistant, that chemical can actually dissolve the glove and cause us more problems than if we did.
Or even melt it to your skin itself.
Very possible.
So do pay close attention to the type of products that you're purchasing to be safe when you're applying these products.
Pesticide requiring respirators. Like we mentioned earlier, we are living in the middle of a pandemic and everybody's wearing a mask. The mask that you require for COVID is not necessarily good enough protection for chemicals. So again, go back to that pesticide label. See what it requires as a respirator. A lot of them require an organic filter.
And if your product requires a respirator, it's really important that you're getting respirators that meet the specification, whether it's organic filter, whatever it may require from that side of things. But you need to make sure that you're ensuring proper fit.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have respirators that are properly fitting your face, you're really causing yourself more harm than good by even trying to attempt to use it at that point in time. So it's really important that we make sure that we've got proper respirators that fit us properly at the same time. So those are some really important things to think about when we are required to use respirators with certain chemicals.
Some good points. Before purchasing a respirator, we need to have medical clearance by a licensed healthcare professional. And that could be your family doctor or another doctor that you attend. But you need to have them check you out to make sure that you are healthy enough to wear a respirator. I don't know if you've ever wore one before, but sometimes it can be pretty difficult to breathe in one of those things.
It's a little bit restrictive in certain situations, yes. So definitely make sure that you can get medical clearance for use of a respirator if it's so required for your products that you're using on farm.
An annual fit test is required, and it's a very simple test. I mean, it's not very hard to do, but it's a very important test to do.
And you need to make sure that by undergoing this test, you have to do that each year. That's the reason for it being annual fit test, because we can gain weight, lose weight. Facial hair is not really a positive thing when you're using a respirator.
Facial hair is a no-no because it won't seal around it. Now, there's ways around it. If you love your beard and you've had it most of your adult life and don't want to shave it, there's some ways around it. But we cannot use a respirator because it will not pass the fit test if we have facial hair.
So definitely get those things tested each year because our bodies change up and down throughout the year for various things, whatever that may be. But it is really important to get those tested and make sure that the seal is proper each year to be able to use those tight-fitting respirators.
And just like any other thing that we do on the farm, make sure we write it down. We need to have that written record that it was tested.
Well, modes of action, we've talked about that on another presentation about the group categories for some of the pesticides that are out there. And they call them IRAC codes
for insecticides, FRAC codes for fungicides, and ATRAC for herbicides.
So all these things have a number or a group setting. And it just allows us as applicators to be able to use products that get the desired results, but at the same time trying to break resistance up. We do this through deworming of livestock. We do this for crop rotations to cut down, biologically the disease presence on different things. We cut down on hard pans and different things through crop rotation. this is just another one of those modes and methods that we can use to cut down on potential resistance buildup by using different numbers. And it's easy to figure out this one's different than that one because this is a 4 and that one's a 3 or whatever.
Yeah, I love easy. But it's makes it pretty foolproof because you may think of it, looking at it, well, all right, I'm not going off the label name, I'm going off the active ingredient. Well, this active ingredient and that active ingredient may treat the plant the same, and that's how we build up resistance.
And they may fall under the same group.
Correct. And that this code here is a pretty ingenious way of helping for farmers to figure out we've got a different mode of action to help reduce the chance of resistance.
And ultimately, we've mentioned before that we're not getting a whole list of new chemicals each year. We're basically dealing with what we've got, and to try to limit resistance from those ones that we already have in our toolbox is really important as applicators, so that we don't start cutting chemicals out from our toolbox to not have them available because of resistance that have been built up over years and things like that.
Safety data sheets. We're required to have those anytime that we're applying pesticides, and we need to make them relatively available for if somebody would come and we're incapacitated. It goes over the name, product use, restrictions, who manufactured it, a lot of good information in there.
So make sure that you do get the safety data sheets if you are using multiple chemicals and things like that. If you're just using a few each year or something like that, it's probably pretty easy to get your hands on 1 or 2 of these things. But there are actually folders of these things available that if you wanted to purchase those or get your hands on them, there's ways of doing so. So definitely have that in your chemical storage area so that they can be referred back to in case there is some type of exposure to the applicator.
If you lose the label or lose the safety data sheet or material data sheet, there is a couple of good websites we can go to at our convenience and print them off. So we will always have access to them, so there's no excuse why we don't have them.
Good information, Phil.
Some of the stuff that's going to be on the SDS from a hazard standpoint, malathion, that's a pretty common insecticide used. May be fatal if swallowed or inhaled. That's not good. May be fatal. That means we're going to die. May cause some respiratory issues, serious eye irritation, or can cause some irritation to the skin. Lorazban, again, may be fatal if swallowed, may cause some respiratory irritation or some serious skin irritation. So anytime that we start to see some of these things, you might want to think about seeing some medical attention.
And these sheets are similar for each one of the chemicals and things that are out there. So it's really important to kind of know some of the potential risk associated with those chemicals from a hazard situation. And the SDS definitely will allow you to kind of get that in an overview real quick. Okay, so pesticide cleanup. After applying pesticides, we want to make sure that we're washing any reusable PPE with soap and water and letting it dry.
Sure.
It's really important to do that. Anything that's a single-use PPE, don't try to stretch that out. Go ahead and discard that. It's probably got some contamination on it, no matter which way that you think. Just throw it away and reuse new single-use PPE.
Always wash your hands and face when you get finished cleaning up everything with soap and water, and make sure that water is kind of free-flowing so that we're not recontaminating ourselves.
Yes, that's really important. And truthfully, the best recommendation that we can provide you is that it's a good rule of practice that anytime that we're out applying pesticides, that as soon as we're done applying those pesticides and we clean our sprayer, just park it and then take time to go back to the house, wash up thoroughly, change your clothes, and then move on to the next part of the day, because the longer you leave any kind of contaminated clothing or PPE on, the more you are increasing your risk of exposure. So if we can cut down on just a little bit of that risk, it's going to help us out tremendously as we move forward for years and years and years of doing these pesticide applications. So definitely take the time to do that. I know it's not in most of our days that we want to do that, but if we can just take the little bit of time that it would take us to do that, your family's going to be happy, and you're going to be happy in the long run.
Sure. Like we said earlier, the dose makes the poison, so we want to make that dose as small as possible. When you get through cleaning it, everything, make sure that it's completely dry before you do this. Once you get through and it's dry, stick it in a resealable bag and then keep it away from your pesticides. Yes, it's convenient to store right next to my pesticides. No, that's not a great idea. So we want to make sure we have its own little place away from the pesticides.
And it's pretty good to keep that in a clean, dry location at the house, like basement or in a closet or something like that, so that it's there, it's ready to grab a bag and go, but it's not exposed to heat and cold and all the elements by sitting in the back of a truck behind the seat or something like that. So do keep that in a place where it's nice and clean and dry, so that those particular items will maintain longevity as well too. So it's really important from that side of things.
Washing PPE, I know, Tad, you just mentioned that we need to wash our clothes. Make sure that you wash your pesticide-exposed clothes by themselves. Once you do that, do a rinse cycle through your washer before you put any more family laundry into that washer machine.
And you'll want to do that rinse cycle at least 3 times just to make sure that you get all the stuff out of the internal parts of the washer and things like that as well too. If they've got quite a bit of contamination on them, just throw your clothes away. In the long run, it's going to be safer for you and your family. You definitely don't want to wash your family's clothes right behind a load of highly soaked clothes that you've ran through the washer. So definitely make sure that you do take the time. We're gonna say triple rinse your washer just like you triple rinse your containers, and then that way you try to cut down on the amount of residue that would be left in that device that's going to be handling your family's clothes as well too. So definitely keep that in mind when you're washing those. But first off, if it's got quite a bit on it, just throw it away. Don't even bring it into the house. Just throw it away as soon as you possibly can, and then that way it's going to be safer for the whole system.
Yeah, and then I've been asked a time or two what my opinion was on the high efficiency washers that we have nowadays versus some of the older ones that use a lot more water. Do they do a good job as the old ones do? And actually, Colorado State University did a study on this. And yes, the high efficiency washers will get your clothes just as clean as the older washing machines that use a lot more water.
Good deal. Well, we hope you guys have enjoyed, some updates and some safety tips about pesticide application and how to handle PPE and handling yourself from a safety aspect and things like that. If you have any questions, feel free to contact your local extension office. They will definitely be able to give you some more input on some of these items that we discussed as well too. But again, thank you for your time and hope you enjoyed the presentation.